Hi, this is Kerry with Multicopter Warehouse and DJI Colorado here in Centennial, Colorado. And today we have the top 10 questions that customers ask us about the DJI FPV drone. So let's get into it when we come right back. All right, the number one question that people ask is, how fast will it go? And the short answer is really fast. I've had it in sport mode up to 62 miles an hour and in manual mode up to 85 miles an hour. And we've seen reports online of people hitting 89 miles an hour. And a few people have said they've got over that with a big tailwind, but without proof, don't really know. But it will definitely hit the high 80s for sure. So really fast. And 62 in sport mode is still really fast. So it goes fast. Number two, how does it compare to flying other drones? And that's kind of an interesting question because it does have normal and sport mode, which is very similar to flying like a Mavic Air 2 or a Mavic Pro, the Mavic 2 or Phantom or any of those products. It's very, very similar to how those fly. It's got the front obstacle sensors and the controls work all the same. It's very similar to flying those. But in manual mode, it is very, very different. It's unlike anything you've ever flown if all you've ever flown are DJI products. Now, if you've flown FPV quads or anything that has a true manual or acro mode, it's going to fly like that. So an example is on the controls, let's just take our right stick. In normal and sport, if you just push it to the right, the drone's going to go to the right. Push to the left, it's going to go to the left. In manual mode, if you go to the right, it's going to just roll. So it takes a lot more practice and experience to really fly in manual mode. So it's a very different experience. Definitely recommend a lot of sim time when getting ready to go to manual mode. Question number three, does it have geofencing? And yes, it does. Just like all the other DJI products, it has all the same restricted zones and no fly zones and all that stuff built into it. There's another one that you need to be aware of, especially if you're near an airport. There is a 40-meter buffer between or below your airspace. So for example, and that only applies to manual mode. So here at our office, we're in a 150-foot grid. So there's a 40-meter buffer below that we cannot do manual mode in. We can only do manual mode below that 40-meter buffer. Well, when you're in a 150-foot grid and there's a 40-meter buffer, that means we can only fly about 18 feet off the ground in manual mode. If we exceed that, manual mode is going to turn off and it's going to go into normal mode. So it's definitely something to be aware of if you're trying to do manual mode and you live or are trying to fly near an airport. Question number four, how many batteries should you get? And that really depends on how you're going to fly it. If you're going to stick in normal mode and just cruise around and you just want that FPV experience, you're going to get some good flight times, typically in the 15 to 16 minute range. And then it's just how much do you want to fly? You know, if you want to fly for 45 minutes, you're going to need 3 batteries. So that's kind of a good guideline there if you're in normal mode. Sport mode, that's going to drop. You're probably going to be in the 12 to 14 minute range in sport mode. In full manual mode, doing acrobatic maneuvers, you can actually fall below 10 minutes. So depending on how you're going to fly is going to depend on how many flight batteries you need. Now for the goggles, the battery is rated for 120 minutes. So if you're trying to have a little safety margin in there so that you don't run out and you're kind of judging it at 100 minutes, well, there you go. How many batteries do you have? How long do you want to fly? How many goggle batteries do you need? So typically with just the 3 batteries from the aircraft and the Fly More kit and the 1 battery for the goggles, you're good to go. If you start adding flight batteries, you might need to add goggle batteries. Question number 5, can you hear or record the prop sounds? Some people have seen videos and it has the prop sound and they didn't think that was real. And absolutely, it does have a little microphone on here so it can record the sound of the props. And if you plug in headphones, you can actually hear it through the goggles. Now, why you would want to do this is a lot of people who are into the full acrobatic modes want to hear that prop sound because you can hear what the drone is doing. Think of it like learning how to drive a stick shift. You don't stare at the RPM gauge, you kind of feel it. You hear the engine rev up or bog down, or you kind of just feel that and you know when you need to shift. Same with a drone like this. When you're doing a big power loop, once you hear those engines start revving up, you know you're kind of going inverted and you know to cut power, and then you know to bring the power back on. And if you're bringing the throttle up and you're hearing those engines really bog down, you know you need to give it more power. So for some people, flying with the prop sound is really cool. Why you would want to record that, I'm not really sure, but you can hear it, and yes, you can record it. Just go into the advanced camera settings and you can enable the prop sound. You are not going to be picking up voices or car sounds or anything else with it. The props are way too loud for it to be used for any other purpose. All right, question number 6. Is the motion controller more of just a gimmick? And this is one of those where when I first heard about it and first saw it, I was like, come on, really? What is this thing really going to be like? And when I first got it, there was no sport mode on it. So you're just kind of tooling around in normal mode. And it was all right. It was kind of fun, but I felt it was kind of gimmicky at that point. But when we got the first firmware update and it allowed sport mode on here, everything changed. Being able to control it with this at speeds of up to 62 miles an hour with this incredible precision allowed me to get shots that I would never have done before. Being able to fly through obstacles, to go through all kinds of crazy stuff, do some really awesome ridge running type stuff. Absolutely love it for that type of thing. There are limitations though. There's no reverse and you can't strafe side to side. So it's like flying an airplane. You give it throttle and you can pitch and roll, and that's how you control it. You want to turn, you're going to pitch it, or you're going to roll it and then pitch back and kind of do like a knife edge turn. So that's how that's going to work. So it's definitely a different control than a standard remote control, but is it a gimmick? Absolutely not. It's an absolute blast to fly with this thing. Another question we get on the motion controller, this would be question 7, is can you actually go straight up and down when using the controller? And the answer is yes. You just point straight up and give it throttle and it'll go up. Point it straight down and give it throttle and it'll go straight down. You do have to be very careful with this because if you point down to the ground and you grab throttle, this thing is going to accelerate like a beast and go right towards the ground. So be very careful when going down. Going up, it's really cool. You can get a nice lift shot with it. So it's not as limited as some people think, but that is, first off, you need to learn how to fly this drone in normal and sport mode and really get a feel for it. It does fly differently than other products. It's tight, a real tight design, but with a lot of power. So that's something to get used to. Now, when you go into manual mode, what you really want to do is remove the centering of the throttle. That is really going to help with doing some of the more aggressive maneuvers. It's going to act kind of like a cruise control. So one thing I recommend if you're going to get into flying manual or acro is right from the get-go, while you're still in normal and sport, remove the centering of the throttle here. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So this will teach you throttle control. It will really help you when you start moving into the more advanced modes, is having that throttle control. This is going to be super important later on. Second, you really need to play with some sims. Now, on iOS, they have virtual flight, and it's good for learning the muscle memory and the controls, but it's not so great on some of the physics and how the view looks when you're up close to things. So I do recommend getting another simulator, either liftoff, DRL, or one of my favorites is Velocidrone. They're going to run about 20 bucks. You run them on your computer, connect your remote control to your computer over USB, and you can fly with your controller in those simulators. Now, those simulators do not go to the goggles, but you're watching them on your screen, but that's where you can really hone your manual flying skills. Now, when you think you're about ready to start, you can go in and to go to the remote control settings, and you have to change the behavior of this rocker switch so that M is actually manual. Otherwise, out of the box, it's normal, sport, and sport. You can change that to normal, sport, and manual, okay? But don't change anything else yet, okay? Because that's going to have an attitude limiter on by default, which means you're only going to be able to roll and pitch so far, and it won't let you go any further. This is going to prevent you from actually being able to roll over and get yourself into a nasty situation. So once you've got really comfortable flying in manual with the attitude limit on, then you can go in and turn that off. And that's found in the remote controller settings under the gains and expos. And that is an excellent suggestion. Is fly in attitude mode first, okay? Then once you're comfortable with that, turn that off and you are good to go. But make sure you first practice with some altitude and be very careful about doing your power loops and things so that you're not losing all your altitude and then smashing into the ground. So it does take some time to learn manual. First, you need to get used to the controls, do that with a simulator. Then you need to get used to it flying and how it doesn't just turn very sharp. It's actually going to drift around turns in manual mode because this thing is really powerful. And then move into the full acro mode. So those are my tips for that. All right. Tip number 9. How do you remove the centering from the stick? Well, that's pretty easy. On the back of the remote here, there is this panel. There we go. I actually got it on the first try. And you'll see these two screw parts labeled F1 and F2. It does come with a little Allen key. If you lose it, it's a 1.5 millimeter hex wrench. And you just put them in here, and you want to tighten them, which is clockwise, tighten them all the way down just until they stop. Then I suggest backing it off about 3/4 of a turn. That should give you a really nice feel on the sticks. Now you can fine tune it a little bit from there, but I think as a good baseline, tightening them down and then backing it off about 3/4 of a turn, anywhere from a half a turn to 3/4 of a turn, should give you a really, really good feel. And then just push everything back in place, and you're good to go. It's this stick over here. All right. Tip number 10. Should you record on the goggles or the drone? They both have micro SD card slots. Well, simple answer is the recording on the drone is going to be better quality. You can get up to 4K video on the drone. It's also going to be where your image stabilization is, the electronic image stabilization and the roll control and image distortion, all that stuff you want to have done on the drone. On the goggles, you're going to have a lower resolution footage, and you're not going to get that image stabilization saved onto that card. Now, it's a good backup in case something happens to the footage on the drone, but it's just a backup of it. This is where your quality is going to be, is on the drone itself. Now, I do recommend always having an SD card in both. Even if you don't plan on recording on the goggles, put an SD card in there so that if for any reason you run out of disk space on the drone, or you lose the card, or you forgot to put a card in it, you have a spare sitting in the goggles that you can pull out and put in the drone. So, good tip there. All right, those were the 10 tips, and I got one bonus tip for you, which is a very popular one, and it's how do I not crash? And there's 2 basic rules, the same rules that have applied to all the drones we've sold over the years. Number 1, don't hit stuff. If you're not hitting stuff, you're not crashing. So to not crash, don't hit stuff. Number 2, to not hit stuff, don't fly close to stuff. It is extremely tempting with this drone to fly really tight, very low, right next to trees, going through obstacles. It's extremely tempting. The image quality is great. The lag is almost nil. So it gives you a high level of confidence when you're doing those types of maneuvers. But when you're starting off, you want to have some distance. You got to get used to how this thing flies. As I said before, if you're going through a turn, it's going to kind of drift around until you get used to actually rolling and pulling back and being able to get those sharper turns. So if you're drifting around a turn, it's very easy to go into something. You also don't want to go super fast through trees and things because you snag a branch or something and this thing can go down. So you got to be very careful about where you're flying, what you're flying next to, your environment that you're flying in, and just don't fly that close to things so that you don't hit things, which causes you to crash. So that's my top tips for the DJI FPV drone. Thanks for watching, everybody. This has been Kerry with Multicopter Warehouse and DJI Colorado. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe, and click that bell icon to get notified whenever we put out a new video. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.